we know Fed members tend to disagree. In the past, much of that has played out behind the scenes. This time, it's happening very publicly. At one point, just in the span of 24 hours, two members gave completely opposite views on what they should do next. Even former members have come out swinging in what were considered controversial comments. And on top of all of that, the president has lashed out against the group and Chair Powell personally, going as far as calling him a bonehead. Joining me now is Greg Ip, chief economics commentator at the Wall Street Journal. Greg, as we say, unlike any situation we've seen in quite some time, how's it going to affect the outcome next week?
Well, I think it is definitely the case that we haven't typically had to deal with Fed officials described as boneheads. That said, I've been watching the Fed for quite a few years, and I've always admired their ability to kind of shut out those extraneous distractions, and I don't think next week will really be that different. You're right to say that there is a division within the committee about what they should do next, but even that is not that unusual. I've seen those kinds of divisions in the past. It's what you see sort of at turning points. So my own view is that they'll probably go a quarter of a point. I think Chair Powell has more or less telegraphed that fairly clearly. What I'd be watching with interest will be the dots to tell us whether there's a strong sort of like consensus for going again at their meeting after that. And secondly, looking at the dissents. I mean, we had two members dissenting in favor of not cutting rates at the last meeting. That was Rosengren from Boston and George from Kansas City. And I would actually expect them to repeat that. Now, what would be interesting is if you might see a dissent from, say, Jim Bullard of St. Louis in terms of like wanting a greater cut. But actually, it's not a bad thing if you're Jay Powell, the chair, to have people on both sides of you wanting to go in opposite directions, because it makes your policy look more reasonable.
But it's interesting, Greg. I mean, you knew about the dissents in the past because you were so plugged in with these guys. But Greenspan and to some extent Bernanke kind of shielded that disagreement from playing out in public quite so clearly. You really had to kind of read between the lines to figure out what was going on. That's not the case anymore. And is that because the data has been confusing? Is that because you have just different types of policymakers now from different backgrounds? I mean, why do you think that this one in particular, people have seemed almost happy to compete for headlines and, and have dueling points of view? And look what happened at the ECB yesterday. The dissenters almost undermined the entire point of doing more quantitative easing.
Yeah, partly it is the times that we live in. I mean, the outlook is very uncertain. That said, we've had uncertain times in the past. And I have seen, actually, Fed officials, go public with their dissents. And I've seen this building for the last few years. One of the most striking things is that you see a lot more Fed officials willing to go on television shows like yours and discuss their point of view. Now, as a journalist, I'm all in favor of government officials with great influence over our lives, like talking about it, talking to us, talking to the public, describing what's going on in their minds. There's not anything intrinsically wrong with that. I think the bottom line is, does it get you to a better decision? If all we're hearing is the public discussion of the kind of factors that are going to the decision internally, nothing wrong with that. I think you get a better decision out of that.
What do you think about the Dudley op-ed? And also, I can't help but wonder if Bullard's positioning a little to catch the president's attention for maybe the next, Fed chair appointment, something like that.
So I think the Dudley op-ed really caught a lot of people off guard. It surprised a lot of people. It certainly surprised me. I mean, what I think is what I'm fairly confident of is that this former Fed official, Bill Dudley, saying that the Fed should consider politics and not cut rates will have exactly the same influence that President Trump telling them to consider politics and cut rates, which is to say zero. These folks, I mean, they focus only on unemployment and inflation. They try to shut that stuff out. And
even that, like we said, the picture's been murkier than normal. Greg, thanks very, very much. Appreciate it.